Yo, what's up guys? Snap here. Today we're going to be giving you a little bit of an update video on all of the last Epoch builds, having gone through the 1.0 patch notes here. There are a few changes to some of the builds, so we're going to go through them here. I'm going to tell you everything about what changed with the build and the adjustments we're going to make as a result of some of the nerfs. If you're unfamiliar with all the builds, I would highly check out my first video on the topic. I go through all of the builds, kind of what they're all doing and the comp and everything, so I would start there if you're unfamiliar. Anyways, let's jump into the changes. First, one of the big things that happened here is Runebolt got a 20% more cast speed buff here. This is going to be to the base cast speed, which is honestly just kind of insane. Runebolt was already your primary rune generator, and so this is basically just going to result in 20% more damage on the Runemaster build. This is a huge buff on this right here. Next, Plasma Orb itself, the orb hit got 40% more damage when it hits an enemy. This is somewhat relevant. Generally, you're not hitting stuff with the ball unless it's like a really big hitbox enemy, like some timeline bosses come to mind here, like the Reign of Dragons boss. Generally, stuff with really big hitboxes you can hit with the orb. However, you're not penning a bunch of fire damage, you're not shredding fire damage or anything like that, so it is a little bit of a damage buff. Ball Lightning did get a pretty substantial 25% damage buff here. You can consider on bosses slightly changing your setup to a triple lightning one that evokes Ball Lightning. I think this does have potential for single target, especially on bosses, so this is something to keep an eye out. I'm definitely going to be trying this on the patch here. Rayowen's Frost Guard got a slight nerf to the ward per second that you get from it, but the really OP about Rayowen's is that it has 30% damage reduction on it on top of all the ward it gives you. So the main part that you're really happy about here is that the damage reduction didn't get removed. You can still maintain that perma 30% damage reduction on Rayowen's. Hydrohedron got a pretty big nerf. The Unique also got a pretty big nerf, so definitely if you're going Runemaster, stay away from Hydrohedron. I think it's just so much worse than Plasma Orb. So yeah, definitely stick to Plasma Orb if you're going Runemaster. One of the major changes here to the carry is that Mad Alchemist Ladle essentially just got deleted from the game. It now gives you 6% more spell damage per negative ailment from 8, and it also has a cap of 8, which means that you're going to be capping out Ladle at a 48% more damage multiplier. Now, if you look at Ladle, there's a huge problem here in that it doesn't really give you very much spell damage here. It's 12 to 16, so the more multiplier really has to make up for the lack of spell damage that you're not getting from your main hand. And to be honest, Ladle isn't a super great option anymore. There's definitely other items that outshine it. You can still equip Ladle early, especially if you get it. You can obtain this item at level 17 here, so if you do get it super early, you can just equip it, but I would replace it eventually. There are two main contenders that can replace Ladle, and the first one is going to be Wrong Warp. This is going to be a classic. You're going to be putting the same mods that you were putting on Ladle before, which is cast speed and multi. Essentially, Wrong Warp, it makes your teleport random, gives you haste guaranteed when you hit stuff, gives you a lot of CDR for your teleport, but the main line is the 3% increased spell damage per 1% increased movement speed. So you need to build a fair amount of movement speed on this character. I'm sitting at 144%, and this is giving me 3 times 144% increased damage to the build, which is quite a lot. Now, this does have a little bit of a downside in that you're kind of diluting your stats a little bit because the Paladin is giving you a lot of increased damage. The Ladle used to be giving you a lot of more multipliers, but now you're kind of stacking more increased damage. Wrong Warp is very strong. It's just you're going to be losing a lot of damage because you're not synergizing your damage types or your buckets, which is flat damage, increased damage, more multipliers, and crit multi. Yeah, the increased damage on the build, we're at like 600, 700%, something like that before the Paladin gives us any buffs. The wand itself is giving us 432% increased spell damage. Additionally, the wand also has a pretty good spell damage base, which is 50 to 60, so you're going to be getting a lot more base damage from this. I think it's the next best option for Ladle, especially in mid-game. You're just going to have to deal with the random teleport. I'm sorry. But you are going to be a lot faster with this setup. Now, some of the other things we're losing on Ladle is we are mainly losing the chance to shred armor on spell hit, which we need to build in to the supports and other places, which I'll go over later. But just keep in mind, when you drop Ladle, you need to build armor shred in on the other supports because it's super important to get a good amount of armor shred. It's a giant more multiplier you should be leveraging if possible. Just keep in mind that when you drop Ladle, try and get armor shred in other places on the supports. One other tidbit here in the bug fixes, these nodes here, Unbridled Ruin as well as Devastating Starfall, these nodes are getting bug fixed in the patch. So you can finally take these to get a pretty good more multiplier that you were missing before. You're going to get a little bit back from the tree here because you can take the passive nodes here that were previously bugged. So I'm going to plan for this adjusted tree here. One last change to talk about here is going to be the nerf to Frost Wall / Flame Ward. So Frost Wall has been changed, and this is the new node after it's been nerfed. It adds a cooldown now to Frost Wall when you cast it. The way I understand this to work is you can still give your teammates Flame Ward even though your Flame Ward is on cooldown. So you can place down the wall and everybody can still potentially benefit from a Flame Ward. So this is especially powerful if you have a lot of people running it. If that's the case and you can still kind of use it how we think we can, you can use the old Frost Wall setup and still cast your Rayowen's Frost Guard using a dummy fireball on the bar. However, there is an alternative if perhaps only one person can eat the Flame Ward, and the alternative is to not take the cooldown, and then you're going to be casting Flame Ward manually and giving it 2 charges. The invocation you're looking out for is Frost, Fire, Frost, which you have these 2 skills to cast, and you're actually going to put Flame Ward back on your bar. Both setups are viable, and you're just going to have to kind of see the behavior on the launch to see exactly how this node works and how good it feels. Just know that you have options for either setup if this node is feeling really bad. That's kind of all of the nerfs to Runemaster here. We're going to move on to the Paladin support here. It didn't actually really get any nerfs or changes that affect the build. There is a couple adjustments that need to be made to this build as a result of the Runemaster nerfs, and that is mainly implementing armor shred onto this character. So it is very important to get an LP cleaver with a giant chance to shred armor on hit. You can also build some chance to shred armor on the idols here on fire hits. The main node that's proccing this is going to be the javelin nodes here, the battle standard, which is casting smite, which is a fire skill. So basically on bosses or anything that's tanky like rares, the flag will be auto smiting it with a fire skill, and you get the chance to shred armor here on the cleaver, chance to shred fire on the idols, so you have a good amount of shred. Additionally, I think it's wise to trade out a little bit of attunement for increased armor shred effect here. It's an easy exalted you can get here. That will make your armor shreds way more effective. It's going to be reducing the armor a lot, and so it's definitely something you want to do if you want to take advantage of that more multiplier on armor shred. Additionally, there have been some passive tree adjustments, nothing too major here. The main reason for this is that since you're no longer using ladle, you don't need to be applying debuffs like blind. You also don't need to be doing stuff like fizz shred, necrotic shred, this kind of thing, so you can strip away all of the other random debuffs that you were applying because of ladle. So just know that you can save points on stuff like this blind chance and put into other useful stuff. Additionally, the last skill you're going to be speccing on the Paladin is going to turn into Judgment. I'm going with this tree here, and essentially this is just yet another way to armor shred. You can turn your consecrated ground into an aura, and these nodes down here give it a really big AoE, and then it also armor shreds every second. So this is just stacking up on the armor shred to make sure that you have a pretty good armor shred going at all times. And once again, I would keep Shield Rush on your bar here for clearing monos, and then I would switch it over to the Judgment and armor shred bosses when you're clearing a monolith boss or a shade. Other than that, that's basically all the changes for the Paladin. Anyways, moving on to the support mage. I unfortunately do not have it loaded up here, and this website has been down all day and last night, so I'm just gonna unfortunately have to talk about it without showing any of the planner here for you. On the support mage, the main thing that got changed here is a change to snap freeze. It is now a cooldown of 18 seconds, and it gets 20% remaining cooldown back when you hit something with snap freeze, including itself. It also changes the flash freeze node to only have 1 point allocable from 3. This is kind of the big change here, because if you weren't aware, flash freeze was changing the base cooldown of the skill instead of the increased cooldown. It's this node down here. It is 16% base cooldown per point, and then it's increased additive freeze duration, which is why this node was so strong. Now it's down to 1 point, so you can lower the cooldown a bit here, and it is probably still going to be possible to permafreeze stuff with snap freeze. You just need a substantial amount of investment in it. Luckily, we have an entire character dedicated to being the carrier of snap freeze. Here is some napkin math on the new timings for snap freeze. If you do some substantial investment in CDR here and you take all of the stuff on the tree, it is completely possible to get these values down here. And so here is a TLDR. With pretty much, really high max investment, you can get a 4.78 second freeze duration with a 6.63 second initial cooldown, which goes to 5.3 seconds because of the 20% cooldown after the refund, which leaves you with a 0.52 second gap on the freeze. There is a little bit more cooldown reduction you can get on some implicits, but I think it'll be quite hard to get, so I'm leaving those out. I think that this is going to be enough to permafreeze everything you want anyway. There are a lot of bosses in the game. Most of them start a wind-up animation after they've been unfrozen and they don't move. They do some kind of like shrugging animation after they've been unfrozen. And so even if there's a small gap here, the stuff isn't going to be moving and is not going to be casting anything. And so this is probably going to be enough. So snap freeze lives another patch in my eyes. Additionally, the Runemaster support here is going to be putting on a last gift to the mountain. The relic slot isn't super impactful on the support mage, and it's just getting a little bit extra shred because he is casting Rune Bolt. And so it is something he can be doing, just stacking a little bit of extra shred because we do need that extra shred since we lost it on ladle. Anyways, that is all of the changes to the current support builds, but I want to present you guys one more build, which is going to be the Giga Juicer high-end carry that you can aspire to if you really want to try and push the envelope in gearing. This build is crazy, and it has it all. It is the Runemaster, it's the Plasma Orb Runemaster, it's the classic, but it is built to be insane. Now, all of this gear here is completely obtainable. It has red rings, but they're 1 LP. High-end items, but these are completely obtainable. The main thing you build around is Rheawind's Fortress. It has a ton of lines on it, gives you levels to your runic invocation, gives you all attributes, which is sick, multi, cast speed imprinted onto it. The line that we care about the most is at the bottom, which is spell damage with runic invocations per 10 armor, dodge, or ward, whichever is lowest. This has a huge gearing challenge to overcome, but the reward is immense. Currently on this character, I'm sitting at 4,300 dodge, and the armor is also surpassing this 4,300, but the temporary buffs from Flame Ward as well as Teleport don't show up here. The limiting factor is going to be your dodge. You're obviously going to be sitting at well over 4,300 ward, so basically this staff is giving you a whopping 430 base damage on the spell. For comparison, the base damage of Plasma Orb is 30, and you're adding 430 on top of it. Additionally, it is giving you extra spell damage per active rune, 18 at the top end, which is adding a little bit on top. Additionally, we are still taking advantage of the dex scaling on fundamental criterion. We're giving ourselves like a 270% more multiplier to our damage after giving ourselves 430 flat spell damage to the attacks. We do have a very respectable amount of increased damage because we have 131 int, and this is 4% increased damage for Plasma Orb per int. On top of that, the Paladin is going to be giving us a shit ton of that. We already know that. Top it all off, the multi is sitting at a whopping 435. You can manage to get this double T7 affix, you're going to be getting an extra 80 multi here. It is very powerful. It's going from 80 to 160 here. This is got a little bit of a dream item, but this is definitely where you can get a lot of multi. The red rings are really crazy in this build because it solves your resistance issue. It gives you all attributes, which is giving you dex, and strength, which is giving you more armor. Dex is giving you more dodge rating. And because you are scaling so much flat damage, it no longer makes sense to put on the dex stacking boot. You actually get more damage by putting on a real pair of boots, which in this case, we're using Snowdrift. This gives us a ton of movement speed. It also gives us a ton of dodge rating, which is how we're scaling this so high. And on top of the astronomical amount of damage you're going to have on this build, you're also tanky as fuck. 4,300 dodge rating is not nothing. On Tunk Labs, this is giving you about a 72% chance to dodge all incoming attacks. That is quite a lot. Additionally, with the armor buffs here, you're going to be sitting around 5k armor with your Teleport and Flame Ward armor buffs up. So if you want to take your build to the highest end possible, I would look towards building with the Rheawind's Fortress. You get so much damage from this. Your character becomes insanely tanky, easy to gear with the red ring. The thing I will stress is that I do think the red rings enable this build. The red rings have dodge on them. It fixes your res so that you can drop all of your idols to get dodge on idols. And unless you have a substantial amount of armor and dodge, which is basically coming from blessings, you need your completed blessings. And on all the other gear, this is going to be worse than Wrong Warp for a long time. So I would reserve this for super high end, get all the gear together and switch to it later. But if you get all this stuff together, it is going to be insanely powerful. And so this is going to be kind of the thing that we're trying to aspire to. Don't you dare buy my 1 LP red rings. I will find you. Anyways, that is going to be it for all of the changes from the 1.0 patch to all the planners. It was a quick one. Not very much stuff changed, but it did prompt a new cool build idea in the Rheawind's Fortress scaling. And I will link all of the planners when this godforsaken website comes back online. Until then, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have. You always leave in the comments. I try to answer as many people as I can. Hope you guys are excited for the 1.0 launch like I am. And once again, I'm Snap, and thanks for watching.